The implications of this graph should strike fear into the hearts of anybody who's ever played TF2. No, anyone who's ever even heard of TF2. Anyone who knows someone who has thought about TF2. Yeah, sticky bombs originally had 150% ramp up. Sticky bombs currently have 120% ramp up. If somehow, for some reason, it was reversed back to 150%, the effect of that alone on TF2 would be pretty massive. Nowadays, when the topic of overpowered classes in TF2 comes up, Sniper kind of dominates that conversation. Is he overpowered? Is he balanced? Is he underpowered? Okay, no one thinks Sniper's underpowered, but you get the idea. When it comes to balance discussion, Sniper's kind of the villain of TF2 right now. And while Sniper's perceived overpoweredness has always been a topic of discussion, with even Valve joking about it at points, in the earlier days of the game, another class overshadowed this topic. Release date Demoman was so good. Too good. I mean, let me put it this way. Demoman is currently easily one of the strongest and most versatile classes in TF2. In high-level organized play, he is the premier damage dealer, and arguably the second most important pick besides Medic. No one's gonna deny that Demoman is a strong class in TF2. Current day TF2. He's also, by far and away, the most nerfed class in TF2. And I think it's safe to say that he has been nerfed pretty hard. Demoman was even nerfed before the game even came out. In the transition from Demoman to full Game Man, the grenade launcher's loaded ammo was reduced from 6 to 4. So yes, there is a reason why it has 6 cylinders, other than just looking cool. But the PlayStation 3 version of TF2, to this day, still has the beta 6 shots. So there was a released version of TF2 with a 6-shot grenade launcher. This truly was peak Demolition Man, but unfortunately he is now lost to time now that the PS3 TF2 servers have gone offline. Now, Demoman's, I guess what you would call problem weapon, has mostly always been the sticky bomb launcher. However, the grenade launcher has also undergone its fair share of other nerfs. Also in the game's beta, Demoman's grenades no longer explode on contact after the first bounce. Footage of this is near impossible to find. I've scoured many a 480p video to find what I think might be the closest I've gotten. You see that crit grenade land, and then the medic runs out and seemingly touches it, and then they both die? Yeah, I think that's it. It might be the only video footage out there of it, but I think it's it. It's also easy to see why this mechanic didn't make it out of beta. But one nostalgic thing about going over footage from the 2000s, aside from the rockin' tunes over the gameplay, is seeing stickies referred to as wind bombs. This comment also mentions having 34 pipes and 48 stickies. And including your loaded ammo, yeah, that was right. Both weapons had nearly double the reserve ammo they have now. And that sounds pretty crazy, because it is, but it's actually not quite as bad as it sounds. I actually didn't know this until semi-recently, but when TF2 came out, dropped weapons did not count as ammo. Of course, it was later changed so you drop a pack when you die, but on release, the only way to get more ammo was from map pickups, resupplies, or dispensers, which does mean that ammo was a lot more scarce. But it does still also mean that you had 30 grenades to spam before you had to start looking. And for an incredibly brief window, from February 19th, 2008 to February 27th, Demoman had both more ammo and the ability to pick it up from weapons. So I don't think it was ever physically possible to run out of grenades. But of course that didn't last long, and both his primary and his secondary weapons had their ammo cut. Soldier also received similar treatment with the rocket launcher, and that combined with the removal of Soldier's self-rocket resistance to non-rocket jumping rockets would effectively make those the only two major nerfs Soldier received. Yet those two changes would still ultimately make Soldier the second most nerfed class. Even Heavy, who was saddled with damage and accuracy ramp up, still did receive some pretty major buffs early on. And while other classes were off getting buffs and new basic abilities, Demoman was just consistently being made worse. But he was indirectly buffed in one way. Probably no one appreciated the removal of damage spread more than Demoman. Just as a quick rundown, damage spread would cause all damage you deal to have an additional plus or minus 15% random factor. So anytime you would attack, it would essentially act as if you were slightly closer or slightly further away, or anywhere in between. Like here, where the revolver deals in space damage of 40, with damage spread it would vary from 34 to 46. But at point blank, it would never do more than its max of 60, and at long range it would never deal less than 20. And for things like melee weapons, sniper rifles, and grenades that don't have a distance damage modifier, this meant the damage spread range was always the same. And these weapons did arguably hate damage spread the most. Like, yeah, it sure is swell that your fully charged body shot could sometimes deal over 170 damage, but sometimes you'd also miss that body shot kill on a medic. 2 hits from your melee would sometimes kill a 125 health class, and sometimes not. And for demo, this meant whether or not your grenade would 2 or 3 shot soldiers and heavies was completely up to luck. But then they went and did something weird. In the SquimJim 2014 update, they reduced the random spread specifically for grenades and stickies to plus or minus 2%. And this was basically entirely to prevent the newly buffed lock and load from sometimes one-shotting low health classes. And I think it was this moment when they realized that damage spread probably wasn't going to stick around. I mean, it does seem kinda dumb to have a universal weapon mechanic act slightly differently for just 2 weapon types in the game. So, just 7 months later, it was removed entirely for all weapons. But if out of some freak morbid curiosity you want to put it back on, grenades and stickies do maintain the 2% spread instead of the 15%. The SquimJim 2014 update also removed an incredibly weird grenade mechanic that was somewhat known about at the time, but not fully understood until it was removed. Even with damage spread disabled, grenades would still vary from 90 to 110 damage based on where they hit the target. Apparently, you would have to hit an enemy closer to their feet to deal more damage. This even affected crits, meaning a critical grenade would do between 270 and 330 damage. Safe to say that dealing a consistent 100 damage is a very big improvement to the grenade launcher, even if the randomness had an equal chance to work in its favor. And to be honest, that consistency might even balance out the nerfs it got, which also included a blast radius reduction from 159 to 146 hammer units. Grenades used to actually have slightly larger explosions than rockets, but this put them on the same level. Though as nice as the current, consistent grenade launcher is, I think the 6-shot rollers explode on contact beta version of the grenade launcher probably still has everything beat. Alright, they didn't get the nickname Wind Bombs for nothing. You know, I wonder who came up with that term. Oh, it was the developers of TF2. In a 2008 interview, when referring to sticky bombs, Robin Walker said, "We agree they're a little too overpowered right now. In fact, internally, we refer to them as wind bombs." Demoman's overpowered status was not lost on the TF2 team, and I always found it funny how Soldier's newspaper and the War Update even referred to this.
"Most overpowered enemy of all time still finds way to lose. Complain."
And to be fair, the Demoman one referred to Soldier as the easiest class. Both true. And like I said, stickies have always been the most contentious part about Demoman. The sticky bomb launcher was designed from the beginning to be a weapon that has both the dual ability to be defensive and offensive. Yet the defensive side has almost never really been an issue. I mean, look at the Scottish Resistance. That weapon has 900 defensive upsides and 1 offensive downside, and it's basically worthless. Nah, we love the Scottish Resistance here, but if the Scottish Resistance was stock, it would be a big nerf for Demoman as a whole. The fact that it's almost purely a defensive weapon does show how much stickies gain from being able to excel at both. Though the sticky bomb launcher has been nerfed defensively in 2 ways. The aforementioned ammo reduction bringing the reserve from 40 to 24, which, by the way, is still more than the Scottish Resistance has, and grounded stickies can now be destroyed by bullets. Originally, they just pushed them around, but since December 2008, they gained the ability to break them. As one GameFAQs user described this change, Demo is gonna be useless now. Yes, this was the change that killed Demoman forever. No, the biggest, with a little asterisk, nerf would come 2 months later. The reduction of sticky bomb damage ramp up. Stickies already have a high base damage of 120, so with 150% ramp up, at point blank, they could hypothetically deal 180 damage. There are 2 things about that though. One, Demoman is basically never going to be standing right in a target's face, put a sticky bomb in their face, and then detonate it there. And 2, it likely never could actually reach that 180 damage. Despite what this graph and the blog post that came with it would have you believe, Sticky's close range damage was not reduced to 125-ish. Off of 120 base damage with 120% ramp up, on paper, Stickies should currently have a max damage of 144, but as far as I'm aware, it's impossible to get it that high just based on how explosions work. In the demo max damage video, the highest I could ever get a Sticky to deal normally was 140, even when no-clipped inside the target. So even in a world pre-damage numbers, where things were a lot more nebulous, I don't think it was ever actually reaching 180. So you never really heard reports of it one-shotting pyros or other Demomen. But it could 2-shot heavies and 1-shot medic, and much more easily one-shot the 125 health classes. To give you an idea, this right here is the range that most weapons would deal about 125% ramp up. The revolver has a base damage of 40, so here it's doing 25% more, which is 50. And that means that this range right here is where original stickies would start dealing about 150 damage. Now realistically, like we said before, because they're explosions and don't deal any direct damage, you likely would need to be a tiny bit closer to reach that 150 damage threshold. And yes, we are talking 150 damage max with a perfectly placed bomb, but still, this isn't even that close. It's close, don't get me wrong, but it's not like Demoman needed to be in the target's face to get it to deal 150 damage. And stickies with this level of close range power do kinda negate one of Demoman's key weaknesses, and that's people getting too close to him. Which is the exact reason that Robin Walker gave in the blog post explaining the change, saying they specifically thought he was too powerful at close range, and nerfing the ramp up to make him more vulnerable to classes like Scout and Pyro. And this change was honestly a massive nerf to Demoman, and maybe one of the biggest overall nerfs to any base of a class ever. Yet, it went by without much fanfare at all. While trying to find posts from that era about this change, I found this one from Christian Gamers Alliance, questioning why Demoman needed to be nerfed at all. And a Nerf Now comic about Demoman continuing to be nerfed because people complained, with many of the comments also saying that Demoman didn't really need a nerf. So take that for what you will. But despite this nerf, Demoman continued to thrive. They can't keep the Demoman down. And it was only a matter of time before the overpowered allegations started coming back. I think one thing worth noting is that people are broadly better at the game now than the early days. Like, yeah, haha, Gibbs free-to-play on 2.4 doesn't know what he's doing, but most people didn't know back then. And even when they did know, it probably wasn't as optimized as it is now. I think that's one of the reasons why the dislike for Sniper has continued to grow over the years as well. People who are good at the game continue to get better, and sometimes that makes the more annoying aspects about fighting a class begin to stick out more. But stock Demoman remained mostly in that state for a while. That was until maybe the most infamous nerf in TF2 history happened. June 18th, 2014, the Love and War update. The Bushwhacker could no longer randomly crit. Sniper mains were on suicide watch, spies rejoiced. Oh, and they also nerfed sticky bombs into the ground. Here to explain the nerf to you is Lofi, the Love and War bread loaf. Take it away, Lofi! Whew, okay, all stickies were given a damage ramp up that would not reach full damage until 2 seconds after firing. And this change likely even eclipsed the previous ramp up nerf in terms of severity. Though it is a little bit hard to quantify that because this nerf happened on top of that one. But I don't think anybody fully knows how the Love and War ramp up change worked. There doesn't seem to be any exact known percent where the ramp up began. But we can see from this footage that a well-placed sticky at mid-ish range dealt damage in the high 70s. Before that, and currently, a similarly placed sticky would deal around 120. So that's a damage reduction of around 40. Though the Love and War stickies would of course gain their damage back over time. The patch notes said that the ramp up began after firing the sticky, and stickies take about 0.7 seconds to arm, so presumably it would take about 1.3 seconds to go from 80-ish damage to 120-ish in that scenario. Now that maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but 1.3 seconds is a pretty long time in a game like TF2, and keep in mind, those were perfectly placed stickies on a non-moving target. Quick detonate stickies were losing about 1/3 of their damage, yet sticky traps remained mostly untouched. And unlike the previous ramp-up nerf, this weakened Demoman at all ranges, with the goal seemingly to push stickies to primarily a defensive role. And while the idea of this sticky nerf was initially met with intrigue, it pretty quickly became obvious that this was overkill. Competitive matches were put on hold, petitions were made that got a whopping 31 supporters. Every time Demo got nerfed in the past, he made it through, but it looked like this was it. Until they reverted the change 5 days later, saying they would, quote, continue to evaluate the use of sticky bomb air detonations and potential changes to that mechanic. But was this an overreaction on the community's part? Did they fold too quickly and revert it too fast? Here's the thing, I distinctly remember playing Demoman with stickies and the newly released base jumper, and this nerf just feeling bad. I remember doing like 40 damage off the edge of a mid-range explosion. And hey, maybe it was my fault for trying to sticky spam with the base jumper on Demoman, but when you're using that, the stickies are all you got. And ultimately, the sticky bomb launcher has slow projectiles, they have a delay before they can explode, and it takes forever to reload all your shots. And if they're dealing pretty terrible damage, it can make those downsides feel way worse and just not satisfying. Like, of course competitive players were going to have a big reaction to a big nerf to one of the most impactful classes, but even on the pub side, it's not like this change was met with big cheers either. You do still have people who will defend this change, but in reality, I think it committed the worst crime and made stickies unfun to use. And Valve does have a tendency to take an overpowered weapon and nerf it to the point where it's just not fun to use anymore. For it to be a good nerf, I think you kinda have to have a middle ground there. Like, maybe the idea behind the Love and War nerf was okay, but in execution, it was just overly harsh. But at the same time, maybe they did jump the gun by reverting it so fast. It wasn't even a full week. Demoman bounced back from every other nerf he had, so maybe he would have done the same here. Now, there is the argument you hear sometimes that stickies never should have been as good offensively as they are, and that they should primarily be used defensively for traps. And the TF2 team did explicitly design the sticky bomb launcher to be good at both, but you can disagree with that choice. You could argue that just because it was designed that way on purpose doesn't mean it was a good design choice. But overall, I do think the reversion was the best decision at the time. And as promised, they did go on to revise their nerf 6 months later in December 2014. Here, they reduced the overall blast radius of stickies from 159 to 146 hammer units, and also added a radius ramp up to airborne stickies, starting at 85% and going to full over 2 seconds, with stickies that touch the ground always having full radius. And, basically, nobody really talks about these changes. They were met with a resounding, yeah, alright, that's fair. It kinda seemed like nobody really cared that much. Does that make it a good nerf or a bad nerf? Who's to really say? Stickies got their explosion radius reduced by about 8%, and airborne stickies were effectively down 22%. Though that would increase over time, but stickies realistically aren't going to be in the air for 2 seconds. The TF2 team wanted to nerf airborne stickies and quick detonate spam, and I guess they did succeed to a degree. It now requires more precise aim. And you know what? It was a pretty seamless nerf, and I think it was handled fine. But the question is, did they underplay this nerf because they previously went too hard? Is Demoman still overpowered? Even after all these years and all these nerfs, is he still too good? The term wind bombs has fallen out of favor, and I feel like sticky spam isn't even a thing people say much anymore. But yeah, I mean, with Valve's tendency to over-nerf things, Demoman did make it out remarkably well. And I think overall, most, if not all of the nerfs they did were handled well, aside from Love and War. So I went to my Discord for some opinions on this. Join my Discord, by the way. And when asked if stock Demoman was overpowered, 9% said yes, 38% said a little bit, 51% said no, and a wacky 2% said he was underpowered. And that actually ended up being a lot closer than I expected. Combined, yes and a little bit counts to 47%, and no or underpowered to 53%. I mean, that's almost 50-50. I was a little bit surprised to see just how many people were on the yes side, but I wasn't surprised to see the majority say no. While nobody would deny that Demoman is extremely strong, except for those people who voted underpowered, you don't really see people calling for a nerf to Demoman like you used to. Maybe that's because balance changes just aren't very likely, or maybe Sniper has taken some of the heat off Demoman. But going forward, I do think I'm going to do a lot more polls like this to gauge how people feel about the current state of classes in comparison. I actually think that broadly speaking, people are hesitant to say something is overpowered. The people who will actively complain about it are going to have a lot stronger opinions, but again, broadly speaking, most people won't go that far, because the term does carry some pretty heavy connotations. If something is overpowered, it probably needs to be weakened. I mean, we saw from early comments that people were even against the initial Demoman nerfs. But Demoman was pretty unambiguously overpowered. Launch Demoman was borderline, if not outright broken. You take the original Demoman and put him in the hands of players today, with better computers, damage numbers, hit sounds, hats, you name it, and without a doubt, he would be overpowered. And regardless of whether or not he still is, Demoman easily holds the prestigious title of most nerfed class in the game. But who knows, maybe it's because someone at Valve just really doesn't like Demoman for some reason. I mean, what makes Demoman and his background so different from the other classes that someone might have a prejudice against him? That's right, it's 'cause he's Scottish. Alright, thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons like Varric, Captain Forex, Egox, Colonel, Probably Vinegar, Caponicus, Kelso the Pirate, Pilsman's Fox, Some Crazy Idiot, Ozond, She-Shells, Salt God, Lavi, Taupe, Time Consuming, Man344, Nolan46, and Melody Chi.